Hello, testing. Is it working? Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is May Makki. I'm one of the co-curators of this edition of the Diriyah Contemporary Art Biennale in Interludes and Transitions في الحل والترحال. Before I start, I just want to let you know that the adhan is going to be in about 40 minutes. So at that moment, if we can just all pause. I'm so happy to be here with Agustina Woodgate, Sara Al Omran, and Lulu Almana of Maghras on the occasion of the closing weekend of this Biennale. In Interludes and Transitions looks at the world as a series of processions, thinking in particular about the movements and flows that have historically shaped the region, but also thinking about contemporary unfolding ones, bringing the past into conversation with the present, and also thinking about the way in which ideas, concepts, people, methods, tactics circulate, and artists bringing those things to life. Agustina has been a natural interlocutor for this idea, in particular because of the way in which her work looks at infrastructure and the histories and knowledges and systems that that brings. And she was one of this year's commissioned artists. We're sitting on top of her work, The Source, which is part of an ongoing series of interactive drinking fountain installations and build off of research trips done in Al-Hassa. Sara and Lulu were extraordinary guides and generous hosts in our initial trips to Al-Hassa. They've been running Maghras, which is a community space that brings together a network of artists, architects, farmers, practitioners of all kinds in order to chart and engage the historic changes of the oasis. And they also explore the farm as an experimental typology. Also deeply connected with Agustina's work into thinking about the politics and poetics of water access, which is the focus of The Source. I'll also say about Agustina, in terms of artistic materials, we might think of those as being canvas, paint, paper, maybe, but for Agustina, artistic materials are also labor, histories, archives, and civic infrastructure. And so I'm super grateful to be in conversation with all of you tonight, and also in the ways in which both of your practices have expanded on these ideas in the Biennale. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Because it's the closing, I'm also in a sentimental mood, and I want to start from that place, which is that the artists and artistic practices that really excite and expand my mind are those that you experience, and they offer a lens to see the world. And it seems so obvious that that's the way in which you should see the world. And I feel like for both of your works and your focus on water, when I first came to Maghras just about a year ago, and when I went there, you had a timeline bringing together different archival materials, you had a screening, you had a kind of open forum where different community members came in and participated, all through the lens of water, but it became the way to see and understand so many of the changes in the historic oasis. Agustina, this is like your bread and butter in terms of providing a lens. It might be an infrastructural one, and suddenly it opens up labor histories, access, class, you know, everything is there. So I want to ask to start, both of you, how did water become the way in to your practice in terms of The Source, this ongoing series and installation, and in terms of Maghras's work?
Do I take it? Yeah. Okay. Hi, and thank you for such wonderful introduction. For me as well, it's a pleasure to share this space with you and with both of you and with all of you. Many of you have also been part of this ongoing process and method, and a lot of the people that are sitting today have informed quite a big deal on the process and becoming of this installation. So I do want to acknowledge those present here. How does water becomes the conduit is the question. Well, I guess my most immediate way of reacting to this is the focus is on distribution and on distribution systems and the design of these distribution systems and what kind of circulation they allow. So then when looking at circulation systems as the way that they are designed, then I look at value, like what is it that is circulating? Why does circulation or distribution methods come into play? Some of them are naturally run by the planet, and some other ones we designed. And sometimes the way we design them seems quite synthetic and artificial and harmful. And so in this way, I started to look at what are these things that are circulating from people to resources, value. And so value plays a role in my practice that somehow takes on different, takes on different shapes. In the case of Saudi Arabia, water is value, specifically in many different ways, no? From social to economic, politically, environmentally. So to then come back to the question is, how do I come back to water? I am thinking and I am looking into circulation of value. Water happens to be an incredible conduit to follow these politics, these stories, these archives, the bureaucracies, and the politics and the poetics that come into play when following these circulations. I not only work with water, I also work with currency, I also work with information, radio frequencies, it depends, but I think that in this occasion, and specifically in this site and in this region, water was quite a strong path to take and to flow in. Yeah.
First, thank you for having us and for bringing us to this conversation with yourself and Agustina. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I think water, and it's beautiful that your series of work is called The Source, because I remember in the beginning of our very early days of Maghras, before it was even Maghras, we talked a lot about water as being the source of the oasis, especially in an oasis that has been sustained and cultivated for thousands of years. Water was always the primary and essential element, whether it's like the human level in terms of the stories, the rituals, the traditions, the cultures are always somehow directly or indirectly tied to water, or the non-human and the ecologies and the agriculture and all these other layers and the changes that happened in the last 100 years seem to be really fundamental to what this the oasis is. And with changes that have happened in relation to the hydrology and the water systems in El-Hasa, so much, it's like a very essential source that carries with it a lot of interdependencies across the oasis. So it's a very, it was a very important moment to just reflect on water as the very beginning and very first entry point to the project. So it is really foundational to our project.
I would also add, can you hear me okay? I would also add what you were saying. It was a very similar relationship where water was an entry point. It wasn't the entire focus. Of course, it is the story of El-Hasa is water. It's the largest oasis in the world. It's part of the Arabian Peninsula that's maybe one of the oldest sort of continuously inhabited places in the peninsula. But really, through water, we wanted to kind of explore something bigger. As Lulu said, it was sort of a window into how cultural expressions and rituals, specifically for us as Maghras, are tied to an environment, and how that roots people to a place, and then what happens if that disappears. So, and we had this conversation the other day of water as source or water as resource. And for us, it was to kind of move away from water as resource and to understand water as a lived experience, the day-to-day life that revolved around the culture of water and the environment that had water in Al-Hassa.
I love what you said about how we tell that story. And for both of your practices, they're very highly collaborative. I'll start with Agustina to say, to build something at this scale involves a lot of people. But not all artists are going to name all those people, the civil engineer, the plumber, and all these other kind of actors. And I feel so much of your work is about actually making visible all the different actors involved into bringing a structure to life, and then more broadly speaking, thinking about infrastructure. And for Maghras, because you're bringing together so many different voices, whether they're artists or different kinds of community members that you bring in that are actively participating in public programs that you produce throughout the year, the last 2 years, there's this idea that the story is told by many people. And I think it's quite interesting, especially when there is also an official story, which is more pertinent now, even perhaps with the UNESCO status of Al-Hassa. So I'm curious to hear you talk about authorship in this way. What shifts when authorship is distributed or shared amongst multiple voices?
For Maghras, we are a community space, so intentionally authorship is horizontal, it's shared. We serve practitioners, artists, architects, in sort of working with them on formulating their research in Al-Hassa, but also by having their methodologies, specifically if they're artists with a socially engaged practice, apply it within sort of a different context, in a sort of a rooted context that's outside of the realm of an art institution. And then with the community, with the members of the community, everyone that live in Al-Hassa, that sort of started kind of, coming to Maghras or connecting through to us and to our work. I mean, I'm looking at Ali Al-Haji over here, who has been a participant in many programs and also a guide to Augustina during her visit. What we sort of offer is, I guess, through these methodologies and through these connections to practitioners, ways to sort of listen deeply and observe sort of intentionally and slowly, and through that, surface knowledge. So it's also kind of a way of making the members of the community that are coming and participating in these workshops aware that they have stories, they carry stories that actually have a lot of value. And through that, kind of through the surfacing of this knowledge, through the surfacing of these stories, new narratives start to form, right? New stories of a place start to form, and that continuously start to develop.
Maybe before we move on to Agustina, would you just tell us a bit about this workshop, this 2-week workshop that you just did, just for those who haven't experienced the magic of Maghras and Al-Hassa? Because it kind of illustrates how this works.
Definitely. I mean, maybe grounds it in something a little less abstract. We just concluded the 2-week workshop with an artist called Jumana Emil Aboud, who actually was one of the artists represented in the last edition of the Biennale, the 2023 edition of the Biennale. Jumana is an artist whose work looks at water and how sort of folktale connects to water, so mythology that emerges around water. And she has a beautiful methodology of sort of collective writing. So we had 15 participants sign up to a kind of a 2-week program with Jumana, with Maria Alim from our team as well, and with other interlocutors that we've invited. To first, there was a series of exercises, but the first was to start sort of understanding mythologies that existed in Al-Hassa historically. And we had Merj Library support us with this. Merj is based in Al-Hassa. And then after we started understanding the mythologies of Al-Hassa that have existed in the past, then we kind of continued with exercises to formulate new stories around water. And in a way, Jumana uses this beautiful term, re-enchanting the springs. So why was it important? If anyone's visited Al-Hassa had over 200 springs, 30 sort of really large ones that people used to sort of go to regularly. All of these springs have sort of dried completely and sort of have fallen in the, kind of in the back of people's minds. They're sort of forgotten spaces, but they're still there physically. So the workshops included visits to some of these springs and in a way rewriting the stories together to reconnect with these places, to kind of re-enchant them, as Jumana says. The program ended last week with a 30-minute kind of collective story that was collectively written by the 15 participants and Jumana, and then performed as a kind of a spoken word performance. So very much as you said, the authorship of it was shared. It was 15 people coming together, formulating this new story that also has a blend of old mythologies from Al-Hassa, the new and the old together.
And even the water was a kind of character throughout these sessions, which is a nice idea as well. Anyway.
And a great segue, because for me, authorship starts at the water. So when thinking about designing a functional infrastructure that actually is meant to provide free, available, clean, purified, in these conditions also cool, water, the location, the site, actually is the first collaborator. So I can come in with whatever design I want, but actually the location itself starts designing what is possible. So the first ideas didn't look like this at all. And then somehow the understanding of the space, meaning literally, like, for example, there's 1 meter between this fountain and the first fountain. There's a meter difference. That's a really big deal when thinking about water flow. So if I would wanted it to have the system, this is a closed system where the last tank is collecting all the residue water. The idea was to put this tank at the beginning, but that would have meant that we would have to pump the water. That seems crazy. Just like, so in a way this, and I know I went a little bit too detailed, but I think that this is important to understand then how the collaboration unpacks at every level of decision-making of the entire infrastructure. I know nothing about plumbing. I know nothing about engineering. I know nothing about tile work. I actually don't know many things, in fact. So the practice is based in bringing all these other experts that have this knowledge that is applied in very particular situations according to rules, regulations, and standards that they must follow. And there is not much room for experimentations, provocations, testing new things, allowing for different ways of thinking about the systems we have. And for me, the artistic field became a playing field to test and to push a little further into the systems that we've designed, and sometimes we don't even question. And in order to enter this conversation for real, there's no other way than to bring in agents that can really bring this knowledge forward. So perhaps my role is just to be the provocator, just to open up the question, open up the conversation, bring up, hey, what if we do this in this location? But that really is as much as I can do. And using, the artistic practice, I can bring this, and perhaps the experimental way of thinking like an artist of like, but what if we do it this other way? And the water engineers will look at me like, why would we do it like that? Well, why not? Here, this is the art world, we can play. And they're like, oh, really? We can, yeah. Like, so in a way, it's a way to hack the system, but in order to do so, I also need to step back and understand the knowledge I don't have. So in this occasion, for example, I was approached by you specifically to to bring this water fountain here, the first question I asked you was, is there any place where there is water in Saudi Arabia, real water coming out? And so you brought Magras quite immediately into the conversation. And I think that, like, I want to bring it back to you, because a lot of the information on the design and the structure of this design comes from conversations with you, and with understanding perhaps a 2,000-year-old ancient system that no longer is relevant or is no longer present, but was technology back then, and still today, when ecology was not a word. And so, yeah, I think that I don't know where I'm going.
I'm
I
glad
don't know
you well,
yeah.
I want to actually invite you to tell us about some of these choices that you made that are aesthetic, but they come through this conversation into the ways in which, in particular, in Al-Hassa, that water was collectively managed, different kinds of technologies and things that informed the design, we can call it.
See, what I was going to
Since
say,
we're here.
yeah, totally. And what I was going to say is, like, I don't necessarily know where I'm going with the design. And nor when I know where it's going and I present a sketch, this was quite an interesting process with those that have been here. Like, we need a sketch. And it's like, yeah, right. Sure. And I already know I'm going to give you a sketch that is never going to look like the end result, because there are so many interlocutors along the way, especially when you work in public space, in functional amenities like such. So the outcome in shape, formal shape, is unknown, but it is informed by the process of research. So in Al-Hassa, I learned that 2,000 years ago, the oasis had an irrigation system based on gravity. And so the gravity of the land was actually allowing different flows at different times of the day. So it was kind of also a sort of like a clock that, like regulating different irrigation stages, so that all the farms will be watered. And so this was also not only an engineering method, but also a collective experience, or a collective way of understanding the land, the community, and the health of the entire oasis as the health of every single plot of land as well. So this is very much informing also the gravity, for example, that is playing an interesting role within this structure. But also the histories of the piping when this oasis got tunneled, the transmission system that is transporting the entire water from the desalination plants to Riyadh. There is no grid in Riyadh. And so all this information of actually the conditions of what is happening with water infrastructure in this region is informing at every step the design of what you see. So there are very little, almost no aesthetic decisions being taken just for the aesthetics of it. Not even the selection of tiles or the distribution of their colors, that I'm sure we're going to go into that. But maybe you can add something about the history of Al-Hassa. You know a lot more about this than me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see how research that we've done in Magras kind of translates into, works like this, where it manifests many different stories of the infrastructure there and the changes that it went through. But for context, for those who don't know, this irrigation system that was based on gravity was a way that, it was water moving through like hand-dug channels across the oasis, and it had its flaws in the sense that there were maybe dynamics of like hierarchy and things like that were used in the way that water was distributed. But it seemed to work for a long time. And then in the 60s and the 70s, there was a major infrastructure project that took place that really fundamentally transformed the landscape and the spatial fabric of these farmlands and the channels and so on by bringing a very modern, very concrete-based, very orderly and like top-down kind of infrastructure project, which is the one that kind of still stands today. And that transition was a really interesting period that we researched a lot, especially in the early days of Maghras and looking at what kind of changes happened that maybe weren't necessarily tied to the technical changes and the physical and the infrastructural changes, but things that changed in people's relationship with the land and in people's day-to-day lives and how all of these things are really entangled in very visible and invisible ways. And I think your work does something also really similar in the sense that it brings to the foreground some of these underground or invisible layers and systems and puts it, you know, in front of you to drink from and sit on and talk around.
I would add something to this invisibility. One of the conversations, hard-won conversation that we had was the visibility of the pipes. So you can see the pipes are all visible and they're in the middle of the path. They're quite on the way. And for me, this was quite important, no? And so this was a conversation. I was like, no, but accessibility and people walking. It's like, well, but the story is to visibilize that we take for granted. We open up a faucet in our house. We don't necessarily understand, not ask ourselves, how is water arriving? You just serve yourself some water and done. But there's something about exposing this infrastructure, like the pipes, that helps to create this story, to follow this story, you know? Like, okay, there's, and for me has been also like an ongoing research. Green pipes carry clean water all over the world. This is a standard. White pipes carry discharge water all over the world. This is a standard. So there's a code also on the color of the pipes. And whether we know it or not, this is clearly very visible. And so the same thing happens with the tanks, no? So I think that visibilizing these kind of things also is a way of creating consciousness, no? Of how things move, at least.
Yeah. Actually, tell us more about, for example, how you approach the cladding or how the gravity-based system, you know, came into play in terms of how you ultimately ended up approaching creating a kind of public amenity here.
So, as I was saying at the beginning, gravity played a huge role because that tank that is actually collecting the residue water is at the end. We were thinking it would be at the very front because it is collecting the residue water that is not being drunk. So this residue water can be used for cleaning or for watering the plants, and there's a truck that comes and picks this water up, and that was the logical way of thinking, was let's put it at the beginning so the truck can come straight from the streets and collect the water. But turns out that there's a meter, and that would meant that a pump would have needed it to bring the water up, and so that felt completely not organic. So going back to, okay, gravity is the force that moves water from the mountains to the ocean. That's just plainly how the planet works. So also going around, like, really embracing the geodesign of it's the underline, no? And so when talking about geodesign, like, that is the natural flow of water. Water flows down. It is not the case on our agricultural systems. And Saudi Arabia has a center pivot irrigation fields. These are these giant circles, for those of you that don't know, these are these giant fields, these circles that you see up from aerial views, very perfectly drawn and gigantic, what these circles actually are agricultural fields, and at the center of each of these fields, there's a hole drilled all the way down to the aquifer, pumping water from the fossil aquifer, which doesn't get recharged at all in this region. Okay, it does, but it's actually that specific white with a brown pie chart. It's a pie chart on the time of the recharge of the fossil aquifer. So that is to say that we are sitting in a gigantic infographic, taking these center pivotal aerial views. I started to understand them more as pie charts, because sometimes also they are not fully complete. They look like half, or a pizza part is missing. This actually is referencing the different kind of crops that they're cultivating at different times, etc. But then I started realizing, these fountains actually could be circles, and taking on that idea of the circle, then they became modules, and then these modules actually are information. So the distribution of the colors of the cladding has a meaning. They are actually, I believe there are 13 or 14 different pie charts. Each one is referencing a different information related to water. That one specifically is extraction time versus recharge time. The extraction time is the white part, and the tiny little pizza brown part is the recharge. So that's kind of the ratio on the aquifer refilling. But then there's other information on the uses of the water, how it is used, domestic, industrial, etc.
Thank you. And you gave us a little insight into some technical challenges, like the slope of this walkway is 1 meter difference from the beginning to the end. But I also want to ask you about just the project of trying to create and restore public space, which both your practices are engaged with. And I'm quite interested as well in the different positions you might have to that. Agustina, the first iteration of this installation I saw was in Miami 6 years ago, where you were living and working. You also did a version in Buenos Aires. Here you came as a visitor, so it's a different status. And then Lulu and Sara in Maghras, you're working in a place that you know intimately and have a personal relationship to as well. So I would like to hear you talk a bit about the challenges and responsibility even of trying to create public space or create a public forum.
So back to the springs. The springs used to be the public space in Al-Hasa in many ways. It was where, kind of daily life happened. It's a place where ceremonies used to happen, kind of wedding ceremonies where people go for the summer, where people go also, there's kind of these sort of beliefs about certain springs being therapeutic. And so when that sort of disappeared, one of the questions we were asking ourselves is what is the new public space? Of course, there are other public spaces, but what replaces the springs specifically? And in contrast to the springs, the farms, which obviously also kind of a main character in Al-Hasa for centuries, is actually a private space. It's they're pretty much all privately owned. They're not accessible. They're not seen as public space in any way. And for us, it was kind of trying to position the farm as a private-public forum for kind of these kind of discussions around the environment. And the farms, even though their status hasn't changed, their condition has. So the kind of agricultural space within Al-Hasa actually started kind of receding. The residential neighborhood started sort of encroaching on farm land. So it was also going through its transformation. Lulu always talks about how Al-Hasa from the outside looks very sleepy, but actually it's very dynamic. There are very, very sort of rapid changes happening when you look at sort of aerial images and so how things change over time. So it was also kind of looking at the farm, giving a sort of a different purpose to the farm that's also kind of changing, right? And So the landscape was changing, trying to see the farm as a different kind of public space, but also the social fabric was changing. So in Al-Hassa, you know, especially with the younger populations, there is a lot of sort of movement towards bigger cities, whether it's Dammam or Riyadh. And that's, I think, a personal story for us as well. I mean, we're both from the Eastern Province. We're not in Al-Hassa full time, and it's kind of trying to understand or how can we be present in a place that where we're not there every day, right? How can you sort of form a relationship and form a sense of belonging within movement? And there's a saying that actually Uzma Rizvi, for those who know her, have sort of mentioned once that really stuck with me, which is sometimes you don't need to sort of lay roots, but to just touch the ground. And I feel like a lot of what we do is that. It's sort of coming together, and Maghras isn't open every day. You know, we are sort of public when we have a program. So when we come together, that's when we sort of come together, talk about sort of what's happening in the oasis, formulate these stories that we're talking about, and then we can sort of go back to our movements in a way. Long-winded answer.
See, for me, the way maybe that I would add to what you're bringing along is another question. It's like, is there public space as we think about public, no, common also? Like, what's the difference between common space and public space? Is there any public space left? Because my encounter has been that public space is insanely regulated. It doesn't feel public at all. I mean, my work, you were talking about how material labor becomes material, bureaucracy becomes material. My work is fully immersed in bureaucracy. To the moment where I finally arrived to talking about the colors of the tiles is a blessing. I've been, like, for that matter, like 2 years on bureaucratic conversation that one starts wondering, is there real space for any kind of public? And even when a work is then installed in what we might think a public space, it is also regulated the way it's being used. Or if the water is shut off, then what are we talking about? Public space what? So there's also a way in, like, public space and accessibility are quite intertwined. So as a foreigner, as a not a Saudi local, I am not surprised. This is the conversation that is constant around the world. So who regulates them? Okay, the agency changes. But the question is always the same. And it's not only about space, but it's also about water. Because is then water common? Is there water, does it belong to the commons? Is it really public? Because it feels a lot more privatized than actually public. And in fact, the whole conversation and the whole complexity of this work is not to build it, nor the gravity, nor the pipes visible, or whatever, is the fact that we are going to be providing free water to an audience. And this becomes politics very quickly. Then water testing comes, and then other kind of information becomes visible, no? When thinking about the invisibility. And so other kinds of dynamics of power are at play. So the conversation of public, it's, a very layered one.
I would like to close by actually turning to another part of your practice, which is your radio station that you've been running for 20 years. It has two main principles. One is that it is recorded in motion, and the other is that it's translingual in multiple languages.
This is exactly what radio is about for us. This is the way we approach radio. I like that you bring it up because I'm going to bring it back to the biennial and the.
Well, I have more of the question.
Go.
Because I want to bring up two. I mean, I've been interested in the radio for quite some time, but also with the theme of in interludes and transitions and this idea of transmissions, broadcast seemed like a natural method and medium for thinking about a lot of the themes. And last week when we were speaking, you introduced me to a term, not broadcast, but shortcast. And it also reminded me of some advice you told me that you received when you first started the radio of one listener is the world, right? So you know, we are closing a Biennale that's supposed to bring local, regional, global artists into conversation. And I kind of want to close with asking you to open question really about how we think about reach and impact. And I know in Maghras, you're even coming off last year, you were presenting Maghras in the context of the architecture triennale, but then of course you came back here and have been engaged so deeply in producing public programs in El Hassa. Agustina, you're moving in between working in places that you know intimately and live and work in, but also kind of connecting a broader story. So I leave it in this kind of open way about thinking about this with me.
Yeah, no. I think that kind of moment of shortcast that we just lived is quite represented on the way that we understand radio and transmission in general, and this idea of the translinguality. I have no idea what that prayer is saying, but embracing it and being okay with it y estar cómodos con no entender is part of what the radio is about. So we shift from one language to another one, and we are okay with it. We live in that chaotic interlude, if you will, of communication, because we believe that that is really what coexistence means. It's not about marking the difference, it's not about translating, it's about being okay with the other, for real, in their own terms. So when we broadcast in movement because our broadcast is about movement. So to not translate is kind of the way. So in a way, to bring it back to this, it's like, this is a way, in a way, is a transmission system, and it also is translating itself, and here it has this shape. It not always has this shape. I not always work with stone. I not always work with circles. I not always leave tanks visible like this. But this is a translation of this region, of this reality. So in a way, it is also a publication, and it is transmitting. I mean, as I was mentioning, it's actual information. So it is a way of publishing in space. That's how we approach radio. And it's very much about a network. As you said, like, yes, of course, having listeners and audiences is really important, but it is also very important for us to occupy and to broadcast or shortcast and to exist in space. Rather than thinking, is there anybody out there listening, is taking the space and allowing others to take the space, the location, to come and speak or sing or just broadcast itself. What we bring is somehow like our know-how on how to do it, but the content comes from the place, very much like what's happening here. The content is this place. And this is a conversation that we had quite deeply with Maghras, no, about radio, but not necessarily radio, again, as a broadcast, but as a transmission system. And the difference, one of the conversations I remember bringing up to Maghras was the difference between cultivating and incubating. And this is somehow what we do at the radio, because we bring this infrastructure into a region that perhaps doesn't know how to technically do this, but our role or our responsibility is to incubate the radio, not to cultivate a radio practice, but rather allowing for this radio practice to emerge for itself. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just a final note for me while you were speaking. It really resonates, I think, on a core level with our work at Maghras, in the sense of like how we really try continuously to create space and then be very attentive and be there to in tune and be able to listen and to hear what is emerging from all of the work, whether it's research, programming, practitioners' work, to really to kind of use that as the primary guide. And just before we went to Milan to set up the Saudi pavilion there, we had a gathering which we called the Harvest Gathering, and there one of the strongest messages we heard was to continue and to keep going and to keep working. And I think that's kind of been guiding us and reaffirming really our reasons for being there and continuing and hopefully continuously growing.
See, I will add to this. For me, for example, these fountains that today are structure, and one will wonder, like, okay, what's the future of these structures? Where are they going? Are they going somewhere? It's also like a way to put it back in the community. I am leaving. What is the future of this? It's not a question that belongs to me. We were having these conversations. Where would you like it to go? Who am I to decide where does it go? Where is it? Where does it need to go? Where does the community want it? Does the community even want it? So it's that level of sensitivity of listening. Like for me, radio actually is less about broadcasting, it's more about listening. Also, it's like, can we share a listening space? And if we share just the listening action, then what kind of community does that bring?
With that, let's open it to listen to the audience if they have any questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for this informative session. My question is to Maghras. Will we see Maghras expanding in the future to other cities and regions in Saudi Arabia?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think it's one of our, I would say, core values of Maghras is being really place-based and situated in the farm and in the oasis. So I think it's integral to what Maghras is to be there and to be based in the farm. Maybe incremental expansions within the farm or the oasis itself, but I don't think Maghras itself would go to other cities. Hopefully there would be other experiences in other cities that we can be in dialogue with, that maybe share similar values, and that would be really inspiring for us. Yes.
Very much like how we are inviting practitioners from outside to bring methodologies that they've developed elsewhere and then thinking with them about how to apply it في الحسا. I think maybe our ambition is that. It's how maybe the Maghras experience can sort of somehow get sort of transferred, but it's in its own way in a different context. I think that's something that we would love to see actually.
If there's no other questions, we can end here and just speak informally at the fountains. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Agustina, Sara, and Lulu.
Thank you, May, and the public programming team and the whole Biennale team for hosting us and for introducing us to Agustina. It's been a real pleasure.